This is my Toyota Tacoma's needle bearing. It's named that because it uses these tiny rollers inside to support the axle shaft. It sits inside the front diff, specifically in the clamshell, and helps the axle rotate smoothly. The thing is, most people don't know that this can be a problem in their 4x4 until it wears out and suddenly your truck feels off. That is actually what happened in both of my Toyota Tacomas. First, my 2019, and then most recently, my 2024 Tacoma, which has less than 10,000 miles. Now you might be thinking, hold on, aren't Toyotas supposed to be bulletproof? Totally, and under stock conditions, this part's normally fine. But when you want to lift your Tacoma, even just 1 to 2 inches, which in my opinion isn't anything extreme, you're changing the angle of your CV, and that's gonna put more side load on this needle bearing. That is exactly what happened to me. Right after I lifted both of my Toyota Tacomas, I started noticing a vibration, most notably in the steering wheel and in the floorboards. Now, I'm definitely not the first to say that vibrations in these trucks can come from all sorts of different things. In fact, vibrations can be very difficult to diagnose. They're a lot of times a black box. I've had vibration issues because of tires before, bad wheel bearings. So how did I identify or narrow down this specific needle bearing issue right after lifting both of my Toyota Tacomas? Well, let me just say, after going down a Reddit and Tacoma world rabbit hole pretty deep in the internet and talking to a lot of other Tacoma owners, I started noticing a pattern. The symptoms were oddly specific. In two-wheel drive, I'd get a vibration around 65 miles per hour. But if I switched to four-wheel drive, it started to smooth out and it went away completely. And this was the case in both of my trucks. Here's why that matters to my own understanding. In two-wheel drive, the axle shaft spins while the differential carrier stays still. That creates the side load on the needle bearing, causing those vibrations. Now, in four-wheel drive, they rotate together, so there's no more relative motion, and the stress on the bearing disappears. Okay, so we might have found the problem, but what's the solution here? Just replace this needle bearing until the next one goes out, or unlift the truck? As it turns out, I'm not the only one. A ton of people that install aftermarket suspension lifts on their Tacomas run into this issue as well. And looking into it, Toyota has been using this needle bearing since the 2nd gen Tacoma, and for my recent own discovery on my 2024 Tacoma, it's still present in the 4th generation, the newest gen as well. That's where East Coast Gear Supply comes in. Now, this video is not sponsored by them. I genuinely bought this part for both of my trucks, which is actually a bushing that completely replaces this stock needle bearing. Now, from my observation, this bushing has a tighter inner diameter, meaning there's more surface contact, and it doesn't rely on tiny rollers that can wear out when the geometry changes from a lift. And a lot of people, myself included, have found that after swapping in the bushings, the vibrations completely go away. So in this video, I'm gonna show you exactly how I install the East Coast Gear Supply, ECGS, bushing in my 2024 Toyota Tacoma. It's a bit of a process. You do have to pull the axle, but the install is pretty similar across all generation of Tacomas. In fact, I posted a video a year or two ago doing the exact same install on my 2019 Tacoma. Basically, all the steps were the same. But before we get into it, I'm just very curious to know what you guys think. I know I kind of brought this upon myself by lifting both of my trucks, but at the same time, I'm a little surprised that Toyota hasn't really addressed this because they know a lot of people install aftermarket lifts on these trucks. I mean, maybe it's not surprising because I have changed the factory geometry, but I'm just curious. I mean, I'm not a mechanic by any means. I am just a girl who owns these trucks and likes to understand, and I'm curious about what goes on and how these work underneath it all. And I'm sure there's a reason Toyota still uses this design, but still, let me know in the comments what you guys think. And now, let's get into the install so that you can see what this is all about. Alright, to start off this install, I'm lifting my truck's driver's side wheel and tire off the ground. And I can't remember if I mentioned this already, but this needle bearing is actually only on the driver's side of these Toyota differentials, as the passenger side uses a ball bearing. So thankfully, you only have to do this on one side. And also, everyone asked me about this jack I use. The answer is a Pro Eagle 2-ton. Yes, this is overkill for the garage, but I also bring it along with me on all of my off-road adventures, and it's actually come in handy on almost every trip. So anyways, with my wheel and tire off, I'm removing this dust cap, which is always hard the first time you do it, but Wedging something in like a flathead and just working your way around helps it out. And then there's this axle nut, which I used to dread removing. But now that I bought a Milwaukee M18 fuel impact, it's been happy days. So easy now. Now I'm attempting to break 2 bolts holding the spindle on the lower control arm, but I could not do it, so I hit it with the M18. Honestly, such a great investment. And I moved my Pro Eagle to lift the lower control arm just to get everything a little more horizontal so that it would be easier to pull that axle. So now I'm removing this cotter pin that's holding on a castle nut to separate the spindle from the tie rod. And I'll need to do this because eventually I want to move the spindle around to separate it from the axle, which is always a little work because the whole assembly is pretty heavy, but I just use a mallet and have my jack stand ready for once I have the two separated. I will say here, you do want to be careful about not overextending brake lines. You can unbolt some of the clips that are holding them in place, but you still want to watch out since you are going to be pulling everything out for a little while. And once I got the axle shaft free, I rest everything on the jack stand. Now, something I probably should have done before I started was remove my front MCX skid plate. It is covering the front diff, so it's just easier to remove it than work around it, in my opinion. And now it's time to pull the axle from my front diff, so to make it easier, I actually went ahead and I bought this tool called a slide hammer after some recommendations in the comments on my last install video. Thank you to all of you. It's what you see me use here, and oh my gosh, you guys, what a cheat code. So if you were like me and never had used one before, it basically works the way you see it here. You wedge in that CV adapter plate between the diff and the axle and then thread the slide hammer through it. The weight hitting the end of the slide creates enough force to separate the axle pretty easily. I mean, yes, this truck is brand new, so parts aren't seized on, or objectively, they aren't that hard to get off, but this is really a time saver if you plan on removing an axle again in the future. So I love it. Anyways, there she is outside of the truck, but now comes the real fun part. So, damage report. I know there's still a little bit of diff fluid in here, but from what I see, the needle bearing looks fully intact. There doesn't look to be any damage. But this was also, I believe, the case in my 3rd gen Tacoma. I mean, I don't see any needles that have been dismantled just by, you know, like feeling around. Nothing's grenaded in here, and needles haven't fallen into the diff, which is a very, very good thing. That would be quite a project to fix. However, no damage doesn't mean that this issue isn't present, because I think still the tolerance, or lack thereof, can still cause issues. To remove that bearing, first stuff a shop towel into the diff to block off any potential debris from getting into the spider gears and rest of the diff. You will see why this step is so important here in a second. Then I'm using ECGS's bearing removal tool, which I honestly, you guys, have mixed feelings about because it is a little tricky. Maybe if you have hands like a surgeon, you're good, but essentially today, I just had trouble getting the threaded insert piece perfectly behind the bearing. So when I threaded the rod and tightened the nut against the provided plate, something must have not been perfectly aligned and I just couldn't get it. Oh, didn't. Goddamn thing's just spinning. Now, this was really the bane of my existence because with multiple attempts, I was just having no luck. And I used this exact same tool on my other Tacoma's needle bearing, so I'm not sure what was happening here. And also I was dumb because I should have totally removed my axle seal. Good thing I bought another one because I destroyed the existing one in the process of getting that bearing out. And you can also see I destroyed the bearing itself while attempting to remove it, hence the reason for that shop towel plugging everything. You definitely should use a magnet to clean up broken pieces and needles as you go like I'm doing here. But at some point, even though I broke the removal tool, I felt a pop and I was able to pull that bearing out. I mean, look at this thing. It is just grenaded. But who cares because we are going to put a bushing in anyways. And as much as I had trouble with the removal tool today, I have to say that the provided ECGS bushing install tool is great. It really just helps you center and get that bearing perfectly into the diff, no hassle. Just look how perfectly that thing is sitting. You want it flush exactly like this, but be careful not to go too much further, otherwise it can touch the spider gears because it's actually a little bit longer than the stock bearing. And not shown, be sure to replace that axle seal if necessary. Okay, now I think if you can get through all of that, reassembly is pretty smooth sailing. Certainly easier than removal if you're making me pick one. Essentially, it's just all the same steps in reverse. So first, getting the axle back onto the spindle once the other end is in the diff. You know, as much as it is a pain and hassle to do something like replace an axle, even though that's not exactly what we're doing here today, I do think this is generally good exercise, at least for me, in case I need to do one on the trail. Now, where I'm doing this today is obviously in a perfectly controlled environment where I have all my tools, but obviously the trail isn't, and I've been on multiple wheeling trips where somebody snapped an axle. So I look at this as good practice in case it ever happens to me. And I always try to remember off-road, avoid doing the 1, 2, 3, which is 1, when you're at full droop, your CV is at its maximum operating angle, and then 2, if you steer at full lock, things get worse because you twist the CV even further, and then if you haven't snapped yet, 3, put throttle input, and now you've added torque, which is a recipe for an axle failure. So yeah, definitely avoid that. And here you see me turning the hub assembly. I like to do this to just listen for any clicks or unnatural movement of the axle. And once I'm good with that, I put everything back together, using a new cotter pin on that castle nut and torquing all my bolts down to spec. I put that axle nut back on with my M18, and Cody checks to make sure everything is Gucci. And I used my old breaker bar trick when I realized I couldn't torque the axle nut without something preventing the hub from spinning. And this is pretty much it. I didn't show one important step, but do make sure to refill the differential with fluid in case you lost any during the install of the bushing. But other than that, I hope this video was helpful, and let me know if you've ever done this needle bearing to ECGS bushing install on your Toyota. Thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!